Hello friends, for today's video we're going to be doing a new fantasy releases wrap up. And the 3 books we'll be chatting about today, they are all adult fantasy works. We have the Fireborne Blade, Goddess of the River, and City of Stardust. And I'll have timestamps in the description bar down below in case you'd like to reference back to any of these at a later date, or if you'd like to skip ahead to any one specific book. And then as always, I'll also have links in case you'd like to check any of them out after hearing about them. But jumping into it, I'm going to start with the Fireborne Blade. I think this is technically considered a novella. I have looked up the criteria, and the criteria for a novella typically is it has to either be under 150 pages or under a certain amount of words. And I don't know the exact word count of this. It is just barely over 150 pages, but I would still probably consider this a novella. Regardless, when I saw the synopsis for this, I was really excited. And then when I discovered it was a novella and then it was so short, I was thinking, there's no way that the story the synopsis is indicating is going to be able to be well fleshed out enough and done in a way that is satisfying to me. Because the setup is that you are following this woman named Madeleine who is determined to essentially gain back her honor by going on what is almost an impossible quest to this dragon's lair, where she will likely have to kill this dragon and then steal this near mythical sword known as the Fireborne Blade. And at this point in her life, she is in a place where the risk is worth it for her because she feels so stagnant and in place. She just feels like her life isn't ever going to move forward if she doesn't at least try to gain her honor back. And she also is living in a world where women are rarely allowed into positions like knights, and so she feels like there's even more to prove in a sense. With that synopsis, I was like, there's no way that 150 pages is going to be enough, because if you're giving me dragon fantasy in this quest to go find this dragon and navigate its lair and steal something and then also make me care about the character and know what happened in their past, I don't feel like 150 pages is enough. I, in my opinion, could not have been more wrong. I love this. One of my favorite things I have picked up this year. I can't wait. There's a sequel that is going to come out later this year, and I'm definitely going to be picking it up right away. I know there's a lot of conversations happening about, is epic fantasy dying? And maybe in the future we'll actually have a conversation here a video dedicated to that conversation. But I don't think that just because there are stories that exist that can tell a compelling tale within a short amount of time, that doesn't mean that there isn't a place for epic fantasy or that people should be forced to try and shorten their manuscripts or fit their story into a more palatable length. I don't really want that to become the norm. However, I also think it deserves praise when somebody is able to accomplish doing that in such a short amount of time. And I just want authors in general, this is a bit of a side tangent, but I just want authors to always have the freedom to write the amount that they need to tell the stories that they're trying to tell. And this book, or this novella, however you want to categorize it, I really don't think it needed more than what we got. Would I have loved to have gotten even more within this world with maybe other characters, people hunting different dragons, which I'll explain why in a second? Yeah, it's so cool and so different from what I've encountered before that I would absolutely be fine if this author just had entries about all these different knights that have tried to go up against these different dragons. So, explaining why I would love that. I have not come across dragon fantasy done quite in this fashion before, in part because of the world building and also in part because of the narrative decisions that the author made. I'll start with the world building though, because that's something a lot of us are suckers for when it comes to fantasy. I'm going to put this down because it's a library copy. I'm afraid it's going to constantly reflect and shine in your face. So I'm putting it down, but I'll have the image on the screen still so that you can have it in mind. So the way it works is that there are what is almost like the stereotype of dragons and their lairs, where they have these hordes of wealth, and there's these knights that try to fight the dragons, and on one hand, it's seen as probably safer to try to attack a dragon when they're in their slumbering years. However, if you wake a dragon from slumber, it is going to be extremely aggressive, and there's also the side where if a dragon is currently awake and it's wreaking havoc, then you're seen as kind of this hero who's ridding the people of this plight, we'll say. And so there's pros and cons to why you would approach a dragon slayer at different times. But they also have, again, these layers that have wealth, and they have these different objects that people are seeking that apparently have powers and things like that. So we've seen that kind of stuff before. That's not new. In fact, that's pretty core, I feel like, for a lot of people's, what they're drawing from, their dragon inspiration. But it is the psychological horror aspects that the author tied into it that made it unlike anything I've seen. So when you are first with Madeley as she is navigating the lair, she immediately, you're gathering, does not have all of her memories. And it would seem it is because when you go into these layers, the dragon's breaths can cause different kinds of things to go wrong. Sometimes they're almost like poisonous. Sometimes they hurt your throat. There's all these different things that can happen. And what seems to be happening with this dragon's magic is that it makes you forget. It's like these pockets of forgetfulness to a point where it almost seems like a defense mechanism, where once you go in, you can't remember why you're even there and you just want to leave. That's how it comes across. And you as the reader, you're like, is that what's happening? I can't tell. And I don't know if the character can tell. And that immediately set up a lot of suspense. I already was fascinated and gripped, and you do get instances where you get world building details about how that's different from one dragon to the next. Hence why I say she could give me different entries of knights seeking out dragons, and I would read them all because it was so cool. And I will say, I had just played Shadow of the Erdtree, the DLC for Elden Ring, and was this not the perfect thing to pick up right after? Because I'm like, oh, it's like Scarlet Rot, or it's like, because if you've played Elden Ring, you know that when you go up against certain dragons in certain areas, there's different elemental things that impact you and status ailments and things like that. Anyway, it was so cool. It feels like such a good thing if you like Elden Ring to pick up, because you feel like you're reading about a character in that world. Because who knows what's even happening in Elden Ring without looking at people on the internet who have spent hours of their lives reading item descriptions, but that's neither here nor there. So anyway, I loved this element to it. And when I say psychological horror, it does not just stop with the forgetfulness. There are things that happen in these layers that have to do with ghosts, because when people have tried going up against the dragons in the past, many times they fail and they die, and then their ghosts linger in these layers, and if they touch you, you are pretty much forever going to be haunted by this ghost. And you will, in your nightmares and in your mind, you will relive the way that ghost died. And for some people, it gets so blurred with their own reality. And so it's scary. It's legitimately like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen when they're in these caves? Among other things that I won't reveal, because there's other aspects of hunting the dragons that is really interesting. The other reason that I was saying that this turned out to be more unique than I anticipated was the narrative decisions. So the author, I have to say, it was quite bold to basically have about 150 pages to tell a story and to choose to not start with our character. I was like, wow, what a bold decision, because you only have so much time for us to care about this character and feel like we're getting to know her and that we actually have some kind of emotional stakes in her journey. And yet you're starting with this almost like interview with a different knight. And this happens more than once, but it was awesome. I thought it was awesome. And there's like these orbs that are able to help recount what's happened. And I loved it. Luna loved it too, I guess. Anyway, it was fascinating. It was awesome. And I am so excited there's a sequel, because I'm very intrigued to see if we're going to get more of this is going to sound out of nowhere based off of what I've said so far, but I'm wondering if we're going to get more of the manipulation of the mages in this world, because that would be that's something I'm expecting. That's all I'll say. That's something I'm expecting. So it was awesome. It was so cool. And I am sad because when I went to check if it was going to have a sequel, because it kind of ends in a place where you're like, that could be the end. But it also seems like it could be the end of just this first entry and there's more. So when I went to check and see if there was a sequel, I saw that there is one projected to be released later this year. But then I also saw the average rating is kind of on the lower end. And I guess that's going to just be one of my unpopular opinions of the year. I think that is underhyped and extremely underrated, because the average rating was 3.77. And I was curious, like, what do people not love about this? And I guess I don't want to generalize people's statements or negate their connection with the story. But for some people, it seems like they really just felt like, oh, it's just like classic, dragon fantasy. So I disagree with that sentiment. But I also understand that it is obvious that the inspiration is classic dragon fantasy. I just think the author did something really unique and interesting with it. But everybody, of course, is valid in their opinions. I just thought it was amazing. I thought it was amazing. And I want more people to check it out. I think it's great. I hope the sequel is really good, too. I'm going to be really sad if I love the first one, I didn't love the sequel. But based off of where the first one ends, I could see myself just getting the first one, and if I didn't like the sequel, not caring, because I would reread that. I thought it was so cool. Moving on now. Goddess of the River. So this is by the same author who wrote KKI, which I really, really enjoyed. And this is a reimagining of Ganga. I loved part 1 of this. This is broken up into parts. And part 1, you are looking at this being who is a river, essentially. They're the goddess of the river. And there are also these godling-like beings that she has a connection with to some degree, where when I say connection, I don't mean like a literal one, but I mean it's kind of like her only means of companionship. And they kind of refer to her as mother. She's sort of this protector of them. They do have a little bit more communication with humans than she does. Her main awareness of humans is more so when they come to her. But after something happens, I don't want to give too many details, but we are seeing she now has to become human for a time and live among humans. And also these godlings that she was with, they also have to experience what it's like to be a person. However, our main character wants to do everything she can to free them from this curse as soon as possible. And the means in which she chooses to do this is pretty graphic and pretty violent. In her mind, she is doing what she feels is the right thing. And I will say, the first chunk of this book is pretty heavy, and the author does note what makes it so. So if you are somebody who would like that information, it is there for you, but I also don't want to give away too much, because I know some people, while they would appreciate knowing, they also don't want to be spoiled. So just know at the beginning of this, there is an author's note where you can read that, and you can, if you want to. I know not everybody cares. But regardless, part 1, I was gripped by it, fascinated, seeing the way in which this being, this entity in a sense, is now among humans and how they navigate that and how they think differently. I was so connected to that. And then when part 2 happened, we are taking a little bit more of a bird's eye view, and we are now following that same character, but also another character. And the way in which being a person and all of the plights that come with that, and the strife and the struggles, how it really does make you question, did the horrifying acts that had to occur, or that our character chose to take part in, were those actually better than what ended up happening? Because you really see the violence that our characters have to endure by living living life as a person. And there's a lot of themes that have to do with loyalty, that have to do with what is the right thing. Is living by principles make you just, or are there times where you have to bend and break those principles in order to do the right thing? But then if you're somebody who's breaking principles and you have no principles, then there's that question too of like, well, then what do you even stand by? And I thought all of those things were navigated really exceptionally. I will say though, after part 1, because we lost that more personal connection that we had, I did find that I preferred the way in which the story was told in part 1 to the rest of the book. However, I don't know that you could do the themes quite as well if you continued to do the narrative decisions that we had in part 1. I think it was necessary, but it did make it feel more like being told a story, being told a piece of this epic, rather than zeroing in tighter. And what I think I actually would have really liked about this is I kind of wish this had been broken up into multiple books. I actually think that I would have preferred this wasn't a standalone, and that we had taken more time, which might seem to be counter to what I'm saying, because I'm almost saying like, oh, well, then we had to go through so much time, and then that made it so there was less connection. But what I mean is, I kind of think I would have preferred if we had dived deeper into, because a large chunk of time transpires from part 2 through the end, and rather than having that all in one book, I think I would have liked that across. So you have the same amount of time transpiring within the story, but over more books, so that you could really feel connected to the characters and really have that theme even more so. But regardless, I mean, I still think the writing is beautiful. I thought the writing was beautiful in KKI as well. I am very unfamiliar with the origins of this, so for me, this is very new, and I know a lot of us are tired of retellings of any kind or reimaginings of any kind, but if you are in that place, I understand. I just don't know that I think this fits within that, because I think, we can only get so many things about Achilles or about Clytemnestra or about Medusa. We can only see so many of those. We've had so many of those, but I have not seen many like this. So I would urge you to, push through that frustration, because I understand it, but I don't want this to fall into that camp, because I don't feel like it deserves to be considered alongside all of the Greek and Roman types of stories that we see over and over again. Regardless, though, I think that this was very beautiful. I think it was very lush. It just missed that connection for me that I usually crave in my stories. I do think this is the best comparison I can give as to whether this might frustrate you or not. So for any of you that have read The Grace of Kings, The Grace of Kings does a very similar thing where it covers large chunks of time and it gives you these pieces and it shows you the main players, you could say, on the board, and it gives you just enough to kind of care about them before moving on to the next thing and seeing like, oh, well, those people were friends or they were brothers or they were in love or something. And now they're at war with each other and here's why. And you go over these big chunks of time, and a lot of people don't mind that. A lot of people love Grace of Kings and think it's one of the best fantasy books they've ever read, or fantasy series, because there's more than one. And if you like that writing style, then I think that the way in which this is written will not bother you whatsoever. And you'll definitely see what I mean about the difference between part 1 and the rest of the story, because you kind of are just locked in, and then you are pulled back. Anyway, definitely compelling, definitely really different. And it's one that kind of has sat with me. So it's not, in my opinion, the most enjoyable of reading experiences. It wasn't cool like the Fireborne Blade, but it does settle in and it does make you kind of ask all those tough questions. And what I really like is the author doesn't try to force you to decide. Or I should say, she invites you to decide for yourself. She doesn't tell you what you're supposed to think. And I do appreciate when authors do that. Last for today, we have The City of Stardust. This one was a bit of a miss for me. Interestingly enough, it also had a part 1 that I really enjoyed, and then it was the rest of the story that kind of made this go a little bit downhill for me. The setup is that you have this family that is essentially cursed, and they will always have somebody taken to repay a debt that is owed that nobody can remember the origin of. They just know that there's this mysterious, dangerous, lethal woman named Penelope who will take a person from their family. And what happens with that person, what she does to them or with them, they don't really know, but it would seem there is also this other city, this city of Stardust, and that there are means of getting between our world and this world, but she seems to be from that world, hence where her power comes from, and there are these like alchemist magician type people that come from there. Our main character, when she is very young, her mother disappears, and rather than having been taken, it would seem her mother is trying to escape the curse and break it. And the people that are left as the guardians of our main character, they make a deal with Penelope to allow them to have enough time to either find their sister, so that, because it is the uncles that are taking care of her, I should have clarified that. So either they will find their sister and basically deliver her or convince her to go with Penelope, or if 10 years go by and they can't find their sister and the curse isn't broken, they will give the girl, our main character, over to Penelope. So our main character is missing her mom. She has no idea what's going on because nobody's telling her. They're trying to keep her very secluded. For a long time, they tried to keep her identity a secret entirely because they were hopeful, okay, well, if our sister's gone and they never figure out that she had a daughter, then Penelope won't be able to claim anybody. Hey, problem solved. But that doesn't work. She discovers Penelope's existence. So Penelope, once she does sort of find out more about what's going on with her family and this mysterious place, she now is determined to find her mother and to try and break the curse as well, and also determine what even led to this happening. And I was really excited to have this sort of ethereal, beautiful, lush, whimsical, but dark world that our character has to navigate, and have that be between our own world and the city of Stardust and the way in which they sort of bleed into each other. And that is sort of what transpires, but it did feel a little meandering for me. There were times where I was really gripped, and I do really like the writing. I did feel like the writing was really pretty, and reflective of the tone of the story, because there is sort of this dark beauty to it. And I kept waiting to feel like, okay, this is when I'm going to be gripped, or this is when my feet are going to be more firmly on the ground, or this is when the character's feet are going to be a little more firmly on the ground. It just kind of always felt like we were chasing the plot. I feel like the hunt for the mother is like the hunt for what we're even doing, in a sense, because it kind of just kept going. But I do think that's sort of the nature of some stories like that. I'm just not sure that it necessarily works for me. I do think there are some stories where there is that sort of general, here is the setup, now go. And you don't really know what you're going to get. And sometimes that works. I think when it works for me is when the characters are, you can almost argue, on the run. Something like The Wolf of Oren-Yaru. The setup for that one is that it's not a new fantasy, but it is a fantasy book. But the setup is that this woman who has a very tense claim on her throne, and a lot of people want to take it from her. Her husband has gone missing, and now it would seem he's popped up, and he's trying to contact her, and he's like, come meet me here. And she doesn't know if it's actually him or if it's a trap. So she goes, and then things go wrong, and then she's on the run. And so the reason I'm comparing these is in that one, it's a similar thing where you're like, well, now I'm just going with that character wherever. It just is whatever happens next happens next. But I think that when there are emotional stakes, when you care about the character, or you find the character interesting, or you're really gripped by the writing, whatever the case may be, if you have something to latch onto, I feel like following the character through these circumstances that you have no clue as to any indication, any foreshadowing as to what's going to happen, it doesn't matter. It keeps you on the edge of your seat, and it's exciting. And in this one, I do feel like we were missing a little bit of that edge of your seat excitement because of the way it is very sort of, I used the word ethereal a second ago. It kind of has that quality to it that you're like, is the character in danger? Is she fine? Where's her mom? There are instances where I absolutely do not need a set in stone, this is the plot, this is what we're doing, this is the heist that we're taking part in. I don't always need stories to have that. And I'm not necessarily a plot-driven reader. I'm actually more so a character-driven reader. As I was describing with Goddess of the River, the plot is there, but I was like, I miss the character. So for me, I think with this one, by having it not be this character is on the run, but rather this character is looking for something, and then they just sort of fall into these different situations and they meet different people, and it was almost too meandering for me. And then there is another character that shows up that is kind of like a love interest, and I didn't love the way that that was done. I wish we had either had that character be more of a focus or had them in the story a little bit less. So it ended up being a little too meandering for me. But again, I really want to highlight that sometimes there are stories where it's meant to almost be like, not quite Alice in Wonderland. It's not that bizarre, but it is almost meant to be, you just are along for the ride. I just don't think I cared enough about the stakes to want to be along for the ride. I think also I found the main character to have very little personality. I think that might be the biggest thing that made me, because like the Wolf of Oren-Yaru, she's kind of a force to be reckoned with, and she's also very hostile and kind of aggressive, but I kind of like her. And in this one, I'm just like, I don't know you. I don't know what to like about you, what to dislike about you. What are your flaws? What are your dreams and motivations? And I mean, I know her motivation is, let's say it all together, to find her mom. I get that, but I just mean, I don't feel like there was as much as I would have liked from her. It almost felt like you could imagine yourself in her position, and it'd be almost like a reader insert, and you're on this quest through both our world and this magical world and things like that. Plus, I wanted more time in the magical world because it sounded really cool, and we didn't get a lot of it. And it seemed like there was a lot of political maneuverings in that world that we would get tiny hints of. And I'm like, I want to go over there. It's more interesting. When I was talking about the other character that showed up, part of me's like, can they just have been the main character and the story could have been all about them? Because I think I would have maybe preferred that, because then we could have seen more of this interesting place. Anyway, it was just a little bit of a miss. I would absolutely read something else by this author, though, because I really liked the writing, and I really was quite gripped by part one. hopefully you feel differently if you pick that one up, and hopefully it sounds interesting and you'll want to give it a try. But anyway, if you've read any of these, let me know your thoughts. If you're interested in any of them, let me know your thoughts. I hope you have a great rest of your day though, and I'll see you later. Bye.